time is one of those things, how we use time, spend time, create time, what we make time for. Like, time is one of those things that, of course, is, and the way we use it, an essential part of all of our lives. And I think when we're talking about simplicity or clarity, I think one of the biggest things we lack simplicity and clarity on is time. And for me, I've definitely noticed how over life, especially when your book came out, I've tried to remove people from having to live their life based on a timeline or an expectation. And I realized that because my life went in a completely different direction, whereby I became a monk at 22 and didn't have my first job until 26. And today lead one of the most meaningful, fulfilling lives in the world, thanks to all my experiences. And so it's fascinating. There were times in my life where I felt like I was behind people that I should be in line with. There are times in my life where I felt I was ahead of people. There are times when I felt like I was trying to figure it out. And I think a lot of people usually feel like they're behind, ahead, or equal to. And that's kind of how we make sense of stuff. And that's why when this book came out, which I know was like maybe a year and a half ago, maybe even a couple of years ago now, to me, I was fascinated that you were able to pinpoint, and go so deeply into time, which I always thought was so much more fluid. And so I guess the first question I want to ask you, and please take this wherever you like don't feel constricted at all, because I like what we're kind of co-creating right now. What fascinates you about time the most that you were so deeply drawn to actually write a whole book about timing?
Yeah, so that is actually, I'm going to put the answer to that in more of the mundane category. The reason for it, the impetus for it, was just frustration more than anything else. It wasn't any kind of deep conceptual fascination. So here we are. I'm talking to you from this is my office here in Washington D.C. It's the refurbished one-car garage behind my house. I live there, like right there. And so I would come to my office and do work. And at a certain point, I realized, like, I'd have a to-do list, and maybe I would have appointments on the calendar, but I wasn't intentional at all about when I was doing stuff. Well, I would write when I felt like writing. I would make phone calls when I felt like making phone calls. I would do interviews when I felt like doing interviews. And I wasn't intentional about it. And I said, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like I end up, I'm actually a fairly kind of rational, I like to think I am at least, a fairly rational, evidence-based guy. And I'm making these decisions about when to do things. I'm not even making decisions. I'm just kind of stumbling my way into it. And so I said, well, there's got to be some guidance out there on like when we should do things. And I found to my surprise that there wasn't. And that got me really curious. I said, well, I wonder if anybody's ever researched this. So I started looking around for research, and it turned out there was a huge amount of research on this question, but it was splattered all over the place. It was in literally 24 different domains. So it wasn't like you say, oh, there's a sociologist who studies timing. Well, there might be, there are, but there are also biologists who do that. There are economists who've studied that. There are microbiologists who have studied epidemiologists. There's a whole field called chronobiology. And so what you had was literally 24 different fields asking very similar, in some cases identical questions. And what I said is like, maybe it was painful, but if I go wide enough and deep enough into this research, I can begin to piece together the evidence-based ways to make better, smarter decisions about when to do things in a given day. But also, to your other point, Jay, when we think about our lives are episodic. Episodes have beginnings, episodes have middles, and episodes have ends. It's the whole idea of the journey metaphor you introduced earlier is like journeys have beginnings, they have middles, and they have ends. And it turns out that there is some fascinating research on how our cognitive abilities change over the course of a day, and then more episodically, how beginnings affect us, how midpoints affect us, how endings affect us. There's research on how groups coordinate in time. There's research on how the way we think about time affects our behavior. There's research, again, all roads lead back to linguistics. There's research based on the way that languages configure their verb tenses. It can predict people's savings behavior, as crazy as that sounds. So it ends up being something that is, going back to another one of your words, it ends up being essential. It ends up being fundamental because we are temporal creatures. That is, we have we talk about colloquially about biological clocks, about a biological clock, but essentially what we know from biology is that, especially chronobiology, is that we essentially have clocks in every cell in our body. I mean, we are walking timepieces. And again, depending on your notion of time, sort of philosophically, existentially, we are in some ways moving through time. At the very least, our conversation began in the past. Right? It's going to end in the future, right? The people who are going to listen to the recorded version of this are listening to something that happened in the past. But those people haven't done anything yet because that's in the future. And so we're sort of swimming in this essential element of our lives. And so what I was just trying to do is just make it understandable.
Yeah, and I think you did a phenomenal job. And so I want to dive into different parts of it. I guess my first question is like, there's a few things. So the first one is, I think the most common relationship, and of course I'm making a huge assumption here, but I think maybe we'll agree, maybe your research will say something else, but I'd say my assumption is that the most common relationship, and I believe everyone has a relationship with money, we have a relationship with time, we have a relationship with anything, knowledge, wisdom, etc. And so our relationship with time for most people is, I always feel like I don't have enough, right? That is a very clear relationship that we all have with time, where it's like, I don't have enough time. I can't make enough time. I can't find time. Like we say all these words, which are all about making, finding, creating, having. What does that do? What is that mindset toward time? How does that actually affect our behavior?
Our relationship with time, we can think of it as an ally, we can think of it as an enemy in some ways. That's oversimplifying in that case. But I think what we're trying to, and one way to make time your ally rather than your enemy, is to recognize the effect, often invisible, that it has on your life. So if you look, so I'll give you an example. What we know from, let's just take the unit of a day. What we know very clearly from a whole array of research is that our brain power does not remain constant over the course of a day. Our brain power changes over the course of a day. So doing something at 9 a.m. is not the same as doing something at 3 p.m. Period. Full stop. Now, there's some complexity underneath that, but the main idea is that our brain power doesn't remain constant over the course of a day. And the best time to do something depends on what it is you're actually doing. So once you understand those kinds of hidden invisible rules, you can begin to make time your ally rather than your enemy, and end up mitigating some of those feelings that one never has enough time. So I think that's part of what it is. People who feel like they don't have enough time, this is not something I write about, but I'll opine about it anyway. In many cases, people who don't feel like they have enough time, sometimes, not always, sometimes it's not a sufficiency of time issue, it's a sufficiency of priority issue. What they actually don't have any clarity about the purpose of their priorities. And so they're moving in all kinds of, that's not always the case, but I think that's partly the case. The other thing that we know is that when time becomes extremely salient in our lives, we underperform. And I'll give you, in certain circumstances, or we're unhappy in certain circumstances. So a great example of that is in professional services, but particularly in the practice of law, is the billable hour. What we know, so if you are a lawyer practicing in a law firm, not working for the government or doing that, or a nonprofit or something, you bill yourself out by the hour. And so what you do is that you have, a way to, well, I'm going analog here, but you have on your computer or scribbled down an account of what you're doing, literally in some cases in 6-minute increments. And what we know from research there is that is incredibly thwarting to people's sense of autonomy. So there are all kinds of things in our relationship with time that if we reconfigure it, we can feel a little bit better, do a little bit more and better.
Yeah, that's spot on. I think that makes that answer and all the parts will make a lot of sense. I think the part that I get really interested by when we start talking about time in the way you just did now, where you talk about priorities, you're talking about the ally versus the enemy, and I love that. Is productivity even the goal of time? Because I feel like today, one of the biggest challenges that I get asked, at least, and maybe your children experience this, or maybe what I see outside in the world of social media, is a lot of people today spend a lot of time overthinking and procrastinating, And that's seen as a negative thing. And people are often like scared of overthinking, scared of procrastinating, or they judge themselves and then they start getting into this kind of like, vicious circle and cycle of feeling like, oh, like I'm wasting a lot of time here. Tell me about what you found, or even your thoughts on productivity as a goal of time versus the effective use, if possible, of procrastination and overthinking.
Procrastination and productivity. Okay, let's talk about what productivity is. I'm going to be literal this here. Productivity is the amount of units you produce over a given amount of time. Yep. So it is inherently time-based because time is in the denominator of productivity. Okay, so again, I'm not sure that productivity is necessarily the best measure. I say that as a writer. Okay, so I could be suppose I wrote more words per hour today versus yesterday, I would literally be more productive. But am I a better writer? I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like, what are the words, right? And so in some ways, productivity is the notion of productivity in that very literal sense is an artifact of our being an economy where we were producing identical mass-produced goods, and so efficiency was the highest value because everything was the same. And so what you wanted to do was, in a given denominator, make the numerator larger. Okay, that's how you increase. That's a way to increase productivity, or keep the numerator the same and shrink the amount of time in the denominator. So that's what productivity is. I think a way to a looser way to measure things is quality and quality, contribution, impact, those sorts of things. And certainly for certain kinds of professions, like being a writer, writing more words is no measure of my contribution to the world.
Yeah. So if anyone's listening or watching right now and is like, Dan, I just feel like I procrastinate a lot, I overthink a lot, and I waste time. What would be your response to that?
So that's the productivity thing. Now let's talk about procrastination, because we know a lot about procrastination. Two big ideas here. One, procrastination is not always bad. Okay, sometimes you're procrastinating for a reason, because you haven't worked it out, because you're still incubating an idea. Okay, so it's not inherently bad. It's not like all procrastination is bad. The second big idea here is that procrastination is basically, in general, the downside, negative procrastination is just an emotion regulation problem, right? It has nothing to do with time. It means that you are unwilling to confront something, and therefore something is so disturbing to you that you would rather actually sabotage yourself than confront it. That in some ways you're making a quasi-rational decision that the pain of confronting, man, can I really write this, is greater than actually not writing it in the first place. And so we know this from a lot of research. Procrastination is an emotion regulation issue. And so what you have to think about is, what is the emotion that you're avoiding? And is there a small step, is there a way in some ways to trick yourself into either confronting it directly or to do something to just get yourself going, and that the action ends up confronting the emotion. But a lot of times, but again, in certain circumstances, it's hard to say. The fact that you're not ready to start is a signal that it might be a very, very positive signal. It could mean that, hey, I'm still incubating this.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I love that perception, because I think as soon as you start labeling and going, oh, my procrastination's bad and this is not a good place to be in, you're right. All of that is just avoiding the actual emotion, which is a signal or a sign or an alert that's kind of trying to get your attention. And you just keep putting it away. And I think what that leads to, and this is something which I found fascinating in the book, it's like starting things. Like, I feel like, knowing when to start a business or knowing when to start a project is like the hardest thing in the world. And I'm sure you get asked this a million times, but like, tell us about the research behind starting something and what you found was most critical there.
Again, there's very rarely prospectively a perfect time to start something. All right, but there are ways to give ourselves a little bit of a different a little bit of a psychological edge. And this is the work of Katie Milkman, Jason Reese, and Heng-Chen Dai. They did it at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, and they had this idea of what they call the fresh start effect. And a way to understand the fresh start effect is like this: that certain dates, certain days, certain dates are what social psychologists call temporal landmarks. Temporal landmarks. That is, they stand out in time the way a physical landmark stands out in space. So again, back to the journey metaphor. You're navigating your way. You're trying to find your way. Oh, there's a landmark. I know where I am. Oh, there's that building. I have a sense of where I am. Temporal landmarks are navigational tools in some ways. But certain temporal landmarks have a peculiar psychological effect. What they do is essentially they operate as kind of a restart. What they say is that on certain days that are fresh start days, you essentially relegate your previous bad self to the past and open up a fresh ledger on your new self. All right. And so there's certain days that actually you're more likely to start something and you're more likely to succeed while starting it. So what does this mean? Let's be concrete here. If you want to start something, you're probably better off doing it on a Monday rather than on a Thursday. You're probably better doing it on the day after your birthday rather than 3 days before your birthday. You're probably better doing it on the first day of summer rather than 3 days before the first day of summer. Let's say if one is a religiously observant, the day after or the day of a religious holiday rather than 4 days before that religious holiday. And so you can, in some ways, have that sense of where you are temporally and pick the right date to start something.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. And my problem is I'll try to start something on a Monday, I'll fail on Tuesday, and then I wait till the next Monday to start that.
Okay, so that's a mixed bag. Yeah. That's a mixed bag. It depends on how deep the failure was on. It depends on how deep the failure was on Tuesday. Now, there's another strategy for all of this.
Yeah, please.
Which on all of this, I mean, it's reasonably well known, and in some ways, it's interesting, Jay, because I think it's analogous to our conversation about simplicity and the opposite of simplicity, or simplicity and complexity. In that, I do think that in many cases we have been seduced into the idea of moonshots and big, hairy, audacious goals. Mm-hmm. I think that they're important. But I think that they're oversold in a way. And what's undersold, just think about it as a pricing issue, okay? So the big, hairy, audacious goals, moonshots, I think they're overvalued. And I think what's undervalued is small wins. And once again, there's a lot of evidence of that, starting from Carl Weick 30 years ago. Small wins are enormously important, because what small wins do is that small wins can overcome that procrastination problem. Small wins can then lead to other small wins and other small wins that cascade into something bigger. So a strategy for overcoming procrastination, a strategy for many things, is to go for small wins. Let me give you an example of that. So the one strategy that I've heard of, I called it this. It's not originally for me. It's just sort of out there. I call it J5, not J-A-Y, but J, letter J. And that's just that, and that stands for just 5 more. Okay, and so if you don't feel like doing something, you say, okay, you know what I'm going to do? Okay, so I'm doing some research right now. Okay, I got these papers. Some of them are incredibly boring. Okay, you know what? I can't stand it. I want to quit. You know what? I'll just read 5 more pages. Just 5 more pages. I'll read that. Okay. Yeah. Oh my God, I got a boatload of email here. I can't deal with it. I just want to go inside and have a drink. You know what? I'm going to just do 5 more. 5 more emails, and we'll do that. You know what? I'm tired of writing. Okay, just 5 more sentences. That's it. And that can get us going, give you a small win. And what happens a lot of times is that just 5 more becomes just 10 more, just 20 more, something like that. I
really like that one. That's an awesome strategy. I think that's a great.
It's very simple. I use it all the time. I'm not joking around. I use it today. When I looked at my email file and I was like, oh God. I can't bear it's okay. I've already answered enough email. I'm like, okay, just 5 more. And you know what I did? I did that and I got it done, and I probably ended up answering 8 or something like that. Another one, a very well-known technique. I use it. I have no shame in using it. You're probably familiar with it. Your listeners are probably familiar with it. Is the Pomodoro technique, which is Pomodoro is Italian for tomato, and so. You set a timer. I have one on my computer that I use on very dark days. I set a timer for whatever. I do it for 25 minutes, and like I just can't bear this. Okay, I can't research this anymore. I can't read this anymore. I'm sick of writing. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Just 25 minute. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to do it for that 25 minutes, and that can and I think let me extract from this, as always, a large theoretical lesson, and it's this. All right, that a lot of times in our understanding of what makes human beings tick, we think that belief precedes action, that you have to convince yourself, and then that is the impetus to act. And in many cases, more cases than we realize, the arrow runs in the other direction. That getting yourself to act can actually trigger the belief.
Yes.
And that's a very, very important lesson.
That's so true. And that's really, it's kind of like when we're like, I can't make my mind up, right? Like even that saying is exactly in that belief where you're just spending so much time trying to make your mind up and decide something. And what I love about what you just said is around that whole, the small wins element of just, I always feel like when you can get into a good rhythm and pattern of keeping promises to yourself and keeping small commitments to yourself, you start to trust yourself. And when you start to trust yourself, you can then trust yourself with bigger tasks. The problem is, like you said, is that we go for these moonshot goals and naturally we fail at them. And therefore we don't trust ourselves. And I feel like self-trust is like the big issue when it comes with time, is that you're like, well, do I even trust myself with this much time? Do I even trust myself to complete that? And you're right about the small wins, whether it's making your bed or just 5 more or, all of these principles that you're laying out, like that just builds trust with yourself.
I'll give you something else that builds trust with yourself that's related to this concept, which is, again, is research-based. It's built on, I've written about this. I wrote about it in that book. I've talked about it before, is the work of Teresa Mobile at Harvard Business School. And she found that the single biggest day-to-day motivator on the job is making progress and meaningful work. Okay, so the days we're making progress, the days we're motivated, we come back the next day feeling motivated. But one of the challenges is that we often don't have a good sense of how much progress we're making. And so one of the things that I've done this is now for like 8 or 9 years now, is at the end of every day I have a progress, call it a progress ritual. And all I do is I just basically say, what'd you get done today? And I just list what I got done today, and I keep a record of that. And I have to say, I almost never look at the list, but it's the act of doing. I mean, seriously, I almost never look at the list, but it's the act of doing it. So I just take a moment. It's a ritual, all right. And I don't have to tell you, former monk, the importance of rituals in human understanding. Right, so it's a ritual. It's a punctuation mark at the end of the day. What did you get done today, Dan? Okay, this is what I got done. Okay.
Well, I love that. How do you do that for other people? So if you're leading teams, if you've got a small team, a big team, a company, how do you kind of help people realize the progress they're making? Because there's something you can do for yourself, but how do you do it for others?
I mean, you could do a version of what I'm talking about for your team. I mean, what I would want to do is I would want to build that habit in others rather than have them rely on me for that. I would want to build that habit in others. So what you could do is you could ask your team to send you that at the beginning, not as a way to monitor them, but as a way to just as a way to build that habit, and then eventually have them continue the habit without sending it to you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm actually going to try that out. I'm 100% going to try that out.
What did you get done today? Just write down the things you get done. I mean, it's a very simple concept. We often have a to-do list at the beginning of the day, like have a done list at the end of the day.
And it's almost like gamifying your mind, right? Because you know that if you got 3 things done yesterday, you might want to get 4 done today. And so you push a bit further.
Right. I think a lot of times also when we're scrambling around, we don't have a sense of what we've accomplished. And so sometimes it can be affirming. So I know that many days where I feel like I haven't gotten anything done during the course of a day, I stop and I do my little progress ritual. Again, we're talking like, 30 seconds, 60 seconds.
Yeah, for sure.
Not anything elaborate. I'm like, okay, I actually got more done than the day. And then on the days where I didn't get much done, you're like, oh, come on, man, you gotta do a little bit better than this. Come back tomorrow.
Yeah. You're coaching yourself. Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. You're in many ways you are. What you're doing is you're just giving yourself, you're you're coaching. If you think about it like a sport, it's like in track and field or in swimming or something like that. Your coach is there with a stopwatch saying, "Here was your time today, okay," or here's how much you lifted today. You have a sense of are you making progress or you're not making progress.
Yeah, I love that. One thing I want my audience, everyone who's listening right now or watching, I want you to be aware of is that literally Dan in this book breaks down everything from like productivity. I've done some of the tests with you guys before, and I've shared the book when we talked about all of the different productivity times for different types of people based on what time you sleep and what time you wake up. Yeah. And that's great. So I'm not going to ask Dan all those questions because they're in the book, and that's why I recommend the book. I want to ask Dan stuff that isn't in the book or is extending the book. And I think one of the biggest questions I do get asked that I do want to talk about is relationships. Because I think dating and getting married and knowing when to either pop the question or when you should expect the question, like these are like some of the biggest challenges in the world on a personal individual level for people. And so tell me about some of the work that you found when it came to not just like when's the best time to get married, but it's almost like what did you find when people said they knew or they felt they'd found the right person?
Yeah, that one is more inscrutable, I have to say. I wrote about that only very, very tentatively because I wasn't sure about the research on that. I mean, what it says is that in general, in America, marriages are more likely to last if people get married after age 25 and before age, I think 34, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. But again, that doesn't mean if you get married at age 35, you're going to get a divorce. You get married at 28. It's just like there's a slight effect there. There are some interesting effects on, especially in America today. People with more formal education are more likely to get married and stay married. People with less formal education are less likely to get married and less likely to stay married if they are. And there's also seems to be an effect, whatever your level of education, on getting married after you complete your education rather than before. But again, I don't think you take those large population insights to make a decision about whether you're going to spend the rest of your life with someone you love. I can recommend a book that is, one of the leading scholars of marriage, really the social psychology of marriage is at Northwestern. His name is Eli Finkel. He wrote a very good book called The All or Nothing Marriage about how marriage has changed. So a lot of what we know about healthy marriages and also how marriage has changed in America over the last 200 years. It's a really, really, it's a very, very interesting book.
All or Nothing Marriage.
Yeah, The All or Nothing Marriage by Eli Finkel, which, there's a lot of really good research in there. And there's some relationship advice in there too. Among the most important things are, what do you attribute to someone's inherent personality and what do you attribute to circumstance? So if your spouse snaps at you, do you say, "Oh my God, my spouse is the biggest jerk there ever was," or do you say, "Oh, my spouse is having a bad day"? And people who make the attribution that it's circumstantial, not surprisingly, end up better off than people who say, attribute the behavior to someone's inner jerkiness.
Right. Yeah. No, it would be fascinating also to look at things like amount of time couples spend together, but amount of time couples spend arguing on useful arguments maybe too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's other research out there. There's a guy I'm spacing on this. There's a guy named Gottman, I think.
John Gottman.
Yeah. He's done some research on marriage, and this is not surprising. One of the biggest things that you see is, if I'm characterizing it right, is not arguing per se, but how people argue.
Yes.
And so some of it has to do with the attribution. The other thing, one of the biggest signals, I think, in Gottman's research is when people express contempt for their partner. Not surprisingly, that's a marker of things gone awry.
Adam, I want to shift from like your mind and your ideas and the way you think to how you live. Can you take us through a day in the life of Adam? Like, how does it start? How does it end? What does it look like? What's been your routine more recently? What are some things that you've changed over time that have actually created momentum and acceleration?
So it's funny because my schedule is completely different than I'm sure yours and most in general. And I think this, again, becoming comfortable with who you are, this was a process, and I didn't have the ability early on in the journey. I do have much more of an ability of it now. But I go to sleep at nearly 4 a.m. every day. and I wake up closer to 11 a.m. So I think a lot of times when I think of entrepreneurs and people in my position, they think you're up at 5 or 6 a.m., you're beating the sun. But I'm the exact opposite, and I found that my greatest point of inspiration and joy is typically during the nighttime when there's less activity, because I can focus on where we want to go, what we want to do, and also on myself, and back to inherently knowing who I was and my brother as well. We've known since we were 15 or 16 that the night schedule worked better for us, but we didn't have an ability to implement it because we're in high school, we're in college, and then when we're starting a business, you have to be on other people's more traditional, like calendar or schedule. And so as we got to higher levels, we were able to continually shift it. And obviously we have people on our team that supplement the early mornings and whatnot, and we work the late nights. But I really embraced what my natural predisposition was for my schedule, and I knew that I would be better if I could operate on this schedule. And just like morning people love to be up in the morning, I love to just push it as far as I can late into the night. And I think there's nothing wrong with it. And a lot of times it doesn't get glorified because it's a difficult schedule. It doesn't work for everybody. It's not essentially normal, but for me, it's been the absolute best thing. And being able to build my schedule the way that I want, I believe, is the ultimate luxury. Because again, if you can control your time, and not necessarily what happens throughout your time, but control how you allocate your time. Most people would rather have 10 minutes of you at 100% than 3 hours of you at 20%. You can't, even though you spend more time, you can't give them all of you. And so one of the things that I identified as I was building my schedule this way and really leaning into it is I can give people 100% of my effort when I'm on a schedule that aligns with when I want to go to sleep and when I want to wake up, and also when I want to work out. If I can anchor those specific things, I can give everybody much more of myself in a shorter period of time. And again, like I've heard you speak about it before, and you said it beautifully. And it's true. Like most of the people in your life, Jay, they would prefer for you to be with them for 10 minutes, give them 100% of Jay. It's an amazing experience. Than for you to be sitting in the room on your phone, dozing off and not giving them the energy that not only they deserve, but that you deserve to give them. And so I think that that's something that I identified through how I built my schedule now. I mean, I work out every single day, and I think that's, for me, it's a really important thing because discipline has been something that has been pivotal to our journey too. And I believe that with discipline, if you anchor yourself through specific things, it gives you more freedom. Discipline is something that opens you up and gives you more opportunities to be spontaneous, more freedom. It's because you have clear pillars, clear anchors. It's like if you're playing a video game and you get to the checkpoint, you can be more brave in your action because you know you can always go back to the checkpoint. So like that's the way I live my day-to-day life. I try to have specific windows where I'll do calls, but then I leave everything else essentially open because I love the chaos in a positive way, and I love the spontaneity in a positive way. And I think that if, for me at least, this is the way I found my schedule. If it's too back to back and scheduled out, there's no real opportunity for the spontaneous excitement, which I think that we all need to have in one way or another. And I don't think that it's the same for everybody, but I think that you have to leave yourself the ability to discover something, or to discover a relationship you didn't think was going to happen, or a partnership you didn't think was going to happen, or a friendship, or things of that nature. And I think that being able to anchor myself, knowing I'm doing these few things at these few times, leaving this window open, so that I can try things. And again, like the greatest opportunities I've ever had have come from taking a chance on something and then anchoring it in the way that I live my life through my schedule. And so, again, it's something that I've had to work towards. It wasn't like that on day one. It's as you get further in the journey, you hone it in more, you have more opportunity to try things, and you have more control. I think, like, again, one of the key things for me in terms of success is control over schedule and control over time. You don't know how much time you have, but if you can control how you allocate that time, that's truthfully the greatest luxury. And that's something that I think is pivotal to success. And I think, again, when we're thinking about our team, specifically in the headquarters, everybody has different schedules because everybody works differently. And I've seen how positive it's been for Ryan and I, and so we try to translate that to the team as well.
I love hearing about how different your schedule is to mine because it still represents the same thing to both of us. So
yeah.
You still have discipline, you still have focus, you're still prioritized around when you can be creative. It's based on self-awareness and what's good for you and right for you. So the values that we're choosing our schedule on is the same. Like there's a very similar value set and it just looks different. And that's actually the beauty of life. Like that. And I think that's where we go wrong, where we go, you know, in a few years, people are going to be saying, oh yeah, I need to do what Adam's doing. I need to sleep at 4 a.m. and, you know, wake up. And it's like, well, that's not really going to work. Or people can be looking at it going, oh yeah, I need to wake up like a, you know, like I need to go to sleep at when Jay doesn't wake. And it's like, well, that's not really what we're saying. What we're saying is if you're self-aware and you create discipline and rhythm in your life and space for spontaneity, then you got to figure out what works for you and where it works for you. And so I love hearing how different our schedules are because it just proves that there are multiple ways that it can look, even though there's a depth of why they're created that way. And in addition to that, what I really appreciated you were talking about is I think we think of discipline as either back to back, and we think of laziness or spontaneity as completely free. And what you've actually said is what discipline is that you've created a discipline where you can be, what I've been thinking about a lot lately is you can be effective and efficient. And efficiency is often seen as discipline, but efficiency means you do a lot of stuff. But effectiveness means you do important stuff. And I think that's what I'm seeing is missing in so many of our lives is that we're trying to be efficient. We do the laundry, do the dishes, we spoke to the team, we check this off, check this off, check this off. But then you're like, well, I haven't had any creative inspiration today. I haven't been effective. And so I'm really glad that you actually explained discipline to be the meeting of efficiency and effectiveness together.
I mean, I think you said it in an efficient and effective way, the way that you just like illustrated what I was trying to get across. But it's true. Like I think a lot of times people think of discipline as something that lacks freedom, but discipline is the thread in the opportunity that gives you freedom. And so I think, and again, as you become more efficient, you can become more effective, but it's hard to be effective if you're not efficient. And so I think, again, you said it in an amazing way, and you took a complex thing and you digested it, but it's been really paramount, and I think it's something that is the way that my life has gone. And again, like I think that we have the same theories, you and I, in terms of what we want to accomplish from our day-to-day lives. We do it at a different time. Like I'm working out at midnight, you're doing things early in the morning, but we're looking to get the same type of result. And I think, again, when you were talking about being self-aware, that is the absolute most important thing. If I tried to work your schedule, it wouldn't do the same thing for me. If you tried to do mine, it wouldn't work. But I think the fact that we've both been transparent, honest with ourselves, and self-aware of what makes us show up as best as we possibly can, and then that makes us better for other people. And so I think for us, like that's an incredible way to phrase it.
Yeah, and I respect and appreciate that in you so much, because I think there is a noise. I mean, I get different noise. So my noise is, hey Jay, why don't you hang out late? Like, why don't you come to this? Or right? And then your noise is, well, if you're an entrepreneur who's disciplined, shouldn't you be waking up earlier? And,
Exactly.
and it's just really interesting how, like, no matter what you do, there's going to be someone who disagrees with it. And that's why it has to, and that's why I respect what you just shared. So I'm so happy to hear that you have this. I had no idea that was your schedule. Now I know when to spend time with you. And I really like that, because I really hope that everyone who's listening, you're feeling more confidence that you're not doing it wrong if you're doing what's right for you. But notice that Adam and I are still basing it on values of discipline, of focus, of creativity. It's not that Adam's not just saying, I do. Whatever I want, whenever I want, and there's no structure. He still even has a sleep. You still have a sleep routine. It sounds like when you're like 4 a.m. to 11 a.m. right? There's still a routine, and so that's what I find is really healthy. Adam, this has been so powerful, because what I love about the way you talk about entrepreneurship is that it's strategic and intentional, but then there's the spontaneity and creativity. And I'm so excited to see what you continue to build. It's, you're 12 years in, and I cannot wait to see you just continue to crush it. I mean, you're already crushing it, but for the business to continue to grow and grow and grow. I wanted to ask you, before we come to the final 5, around creativity and innovation. And you spoke about spontaneity there, meeting someone random, like bumping into an idea. I love that so much. What has been your secret to creativity and innovation? Where have you continued to find that discipline and that connection?
So I think one of our, I don't know if secrets is the right word, but again, back to my brother, like the fact that there's 2 of us and that we're able to go through life together and we've had similar experiences. I mean, my brother, like, to be fully transparent, is more creative than I am. And like, when we're thinking of color stories and whatnot, Ryan's always building these beautiful color stories. Cody, who's our design director, is amazing. Jake is our content director. He's incredible. Sam, who heads up social, she's amazing as well. And just the whole team, like, I could go on and on. But one of the things that I discovered, and this actually came from my mom. So, and you will know based on what my life has become, but until I was like 25 years old, I'm 34 now, so no, maybe even older. This is like 2013. But let's use 25 as the number. Until I'm 25 years old, I hardly have ever left the country. I left the country twice actually. I went to Mexico one time and I went to London one time. And it's like each one was for 2 days. And then when I'm 25, my mom basically says, like, you guys need to do more and see more things. You need to discover more things. So we were so laser focused on what we're going to do. So a lot of the things that I've reflected on today with you, Jay, is things I've learned more specifically over the last 6 or 7 years in terms of like the spontaneity, the freedom. And I've always had the discipline, but it was almost at a level that was too high. And so my mom had said, they were going to Hong Kong, and it was for this wedding. She's like, you need to come, like, it's an old family friend, you have to come to this wedding. And I had no intention of traveling overseas. Long story short, Ryan and I ended up going. It's the most incredible trip. Just like going outside of the country, seeing something completely different, changing our perspective. And when we're there, we get inspired by this bridge. And this bridge that I'd never seen pictures of it. anything. We get inspired by this bridge. We end up creating a shoe based on this. We end up going to another country, visit years later, inspired by that. And so I think that travel allowed us to change our point of view, change our perspective when you're thinking of creativity. A lot of times there's things in your day-to-day life that when you're thinking about repetition, you don't pay attention to it because it comes almost a second nature, it's reoccurring. But when you go to a new place, everything is new. You have to pay attention to your surroundings because it's uncomfortable, not necessarily negatively, but in a positive way. You get all of the stimulation through your senses, you're seeing things, you're meeting people. And so when my mom pushed me out of my comfort zone, then it completely changed the way that I was viewing the world. And it made it so that I was much more open to receiving what the world had than just pushing what I wanted to do or what the intention was. And so I think like that made it so it's kind of like, I don't know if you remember on the old cell phone signals, when you would make a call going out, it would be like an arrow pushing like this, but when someone's sending you a message, it's going both ways. And so that's kind of what that calibration did to how we discover creativity. And now like one of the greatest things that inspires me is movement, whether it's movement in cars, movement on foot, movement in the air. And so I think like movement in general, changing your surroundings, not necessarily going to another country or another state, but even going anywhere, just discovering. I think the opportunity for movement, that's really where the creativity came for us. And then again, I think that if you can take an idea, lean into it and see like, and speak to why this makes you feel different, you'll find inspiration in it. And I think that for us, like we have an incredible team that finds inspiration in different places, and then we're able to talk about it. And the greatest thing you can do is be a great communicator, because if you can articulate what your vision is, and whether that's through verbal, whether it's through art, whether it's through anything, people will understand and people will feel it. Not everybody will, but some people will. And I think like that's one of the things that's gone really, really far for us, is that we've been able to take these inspirational things, like our streamline shoe, which is my favorite one, is inspired by Japanese souffle pancakes from when Ryan and I were in Tokyo, and like Ryan's obsessed with them. But we took that and we made it into a shoe. And so it's like you never know where the inspiration is going to come from, but if you allow yourself to receive it, you can get it. And I think like that's something that a lot of people don't think of. They think they have to put it out there and push it, but a lot of times just receiving what's around you will give you a lot of inspiration into what you should do.
I am so glad I asked you that question. I was about to not ask you that question, but I'm so happy. And even though you're giving, of course, which is wonderful to hear, the credit to your team and your brother for being the creative one.